skill. I'd like to hear your thoughts on these top pages. The hashtag is New Dawn. Now, gentlemen, we'll be discussing what's making headlines on the dailies in a lot more detail at the top of the hour. But I'd like to get your thoughts on other things that are making headlines. And we take a look at page 3 of the People Daily there. And it's some of the allocations to the Education Ministry, for example, securing 656 billion shillings in budgetary allocation. I'd like to begin with you, Dr. Mwangi, very briefly, because we'll be discussing this in a lot more detail. What do you make of this 3.9 trillion shilling budget that the Kenya Kwanza government insists has been revised down because the initial estimates were at 4.2 trillion shillings?
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Kamau, not Mwangi.
My apologies.
Dr. Alex Kamau. Okay. Yes, my take about this budget of 3.9 trillion is that it is an increase from what we had last year. Last year we were working with 3.6 trillion. And though eventually there was supplementary 1 budget and supplementary 2 budget, so even if we had started at 3.6 trillion, we ended up at 3.9 trillion. So what the budget that we read yesterday at 3.9 trillion, we are likely even to see it going to about 4.5 trillion by the end of the year. There is something that the government is very happy about, that we have reduced the fiscal deficit from about 700 billion to around half a trillion, 500 billion. But that is not necessarily true, because what will happen is that because this year, the coming year, we anticipate that KRA will collect 2.9 trillion, which is not possible, because even the target they had for the current year, which is ending at the end of this month, was 2.6 trillion. They have not been able to meet that target. Actually, they are likely to miss it by about 300 billion. So now KRA or the government becoming so aggressive or so optimistic that the budget for the current year we have not met in terms of revenue collection, and despite that, we continue to say that we will raise the ordinary revenue to 2.9 trillion. So what will happen in the event that KRA does not meet its revenue target, we will borrow more. So this issue of saying that we have been able to reduce our fiscal deficit, it is not true at all, and it is just a matter of time that by the time we are coming here a year later, we will know that they had predicted to borrow about 500 billion, but they will have ended up borrowing close to 1 trillion. Right.
Mokesi, we'll be talking about the winners and the losers, and also just a Monanchi overview of the budget estimates yesterday. But it's notable that just hours before the Treasury Cabinet Secretary read out that budget, the fiscal deficit was increased by about 83 billion shillings, if I'm not wrong, to about 597 billion shillings. What does that tell you?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think we have to be optimistic as a country. However, there are more pressing things that have actually been occasioned, and that's why you find that the deficit is growing. And there was something that was added, and I see you started by mentioning what has happened in the education sector, the allocations that have been made, especially the transition of JSS teachers from contract to permanent and pensionable. I mean, things like those do increase quite the expenditure that was expected. There are subtle things that have been added within this particular budget that indeed increase the expenditure that was anticipated. The intent is good by nature, but of course, I do hold a similar view with Daktari here, that yes, there's a challenge that we might have there in terms of revenue collection. But I think the government is very aware that this is an issue at hand. What I could pray for is that during this particular financial year, that the revenue collection measures that the government has intended to adopt actually do take effect. We had a number of revenue measures that were completely shut down. You saw that the government rolled out the e-teams, that the intent was to capture as many people who are doing business, small business holders, into the tax bracket. But eventually politics came, and we saw people actually being removed from E-teams who were meant to actually help in terms of the revenue collection. So unless government also gets very serious about mopping up as much cash and as much revenue in form of taxes and from the masses, I think a lot of these budget measures are going to look ambitious in the end. And if expenditure is not rationalized, yes, the deficits will keep on growing, and we might end up into the same debt trap that we were a few years back, going back to external sources to support development expenditure, to support recurrent expenditure, because we are not collecting as much as we should be collecting, considering the kind of expenditure measures that we've put in place.
All right, and Anthony, of course, we've seen an increase in the budget from 3.7 to 3.9 trillion shillings, but Kenyans continue to raise concern about the prioritization of the budget itself. The health sector, when you take a look at page 3 of the People Daily there, received a big cut for the second consecutive year from a government that says they are prioritizing implementation of universal healthcare. So just before we get to the breakdown itself, what are your thoughts on the prioritization? What in your view informed the priority level in the budget?
First of all, I want to say that we really need not to go ahead of ourselves and be prophets of doom and say that we are not going to achieve our tax targets. The president has been quite clear that we ought to live within our means, and I think this budget really addresses that. Like you had mentioned earlier, the initial estimates were slightly above what we have, and they were revised down by around 273 million. And I'd say if you look at some of, particularly, let me just reference the finance bill a little bit. If you look at some of the tax measures that the government is trying to target, when you look at the Finance Act of 2023-2024, more so targeted on the direct taxes, and that those ones are usually employers' deductions. But if you look at the government, what we are trying to do is to expand our tax base, and ideally that's why we are targeting indirect taxes, and particularly those are the ones that are called consumer taxes, and that's why we are seeing the 16% VAT on bread. We are seeing the 2.5 on motor vehicles and whatnot. But back to our budget, I feel like it really addresses the priorities that the country has. If you look at the social health insurance fund, social insurance, which ideally is supposed to be implemented in the next
financial year.
Yes, in the next few days, we have a good allocation for the primary health care, and also and to support those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. And we also have good allocations for chronic illnesses as well, which has been a major gap when it comes to financing of health. When you look at allocations in the education sector, of course, we have seen an increase in JSS. We saw the directive by the president that the current JSS interns need to be hired on permanent basis. And of course, we have the upcoming transition to fully CBC, because this year we'll see the last lot of Form 4s do their KCSE, and ideally that is what, those are some of the things that informed the reduction in budgetary allocation in the education sector. For the first time in our budget, after a very long time, we won't have allocations towards KCSE marking and all that management that goes ahead there. When you look at the agricultural sector, we see a lot of reforms coming in the sugar industry. We also see 10 billion allocation to support fertilizer subsidy, which has been more so like the backbone of our agricultural sector. We have also seen a lot of allocation in the dairy sector. And I feel like we got the priorities right.
All right, but look, if we talk about priorities, we'll speak about it in a lot more detail, but when you talk about the health sector, and this is the second consecutive year that it's receiving a budget cut, and Kenya, even in the last financial year, fell short of the allocation to health according to the Abuja Declaration. How then are we prioritizing health if we are not even meeting the bare minimum in the standard of allocation?
Like I said, we ought to live within our means. Of course, like my brother has said, the current budget is a slight increase from the 2023-2024 budget, and we ought to, like I've said, live within our means.
Okay. I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Dr. Kamau, because as a result of the under-allocation, so to speak, in the health sector, majority of Kenyans still struggle with access to quality, timely health care, lack of medication, and all these things. We've seen all these complaints even within the current financial year. So we hear a budget cut in this same sector when we are transitioning into SHIF and we have the Social Health Authority coming up. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think it's a very sad story because when we have a reduction in the budget for the health sector, it means a lot because when Kenyans are not healthy, it means they will not be productive. What the government should be doing is should be prioritizing various forms of improving the health sector. For instance, the issue of preventive care. They should be funding issues of to do with cancer-free checkups. In terms of ensuring that they build more hospitals, in terms of ensuring that these hospitals are supplied with medicine. Like for instance, as we speak right now, many people are going to the public hospitals and they are not getting the medicine that they want. They are being told it is either out of supply or it is yet to be fed into the system. So they are forced to really go out there and buy in the pharmacies. So I think the issue of healthcare is very key to the development of the nation, because when the employees or the citizens are not healthy, then it means they are not productive.
Absolutely. So the front page of the Daily Nation, as we move on for the dailies, there says gives a breakdown of the numbers, and if you just have a look at that. In the midst of the debate on the finance bill, Kenyans were keen to listen to the speech by the Treasury Cabinet Secretary itself. Tom Okesi, when you take a look at the Daily Nation, the losers, bread prices are still set to go up because the Treasury CS remained mute on plans to eliminate that 16% VAT on bread. He also omitted in his speech that cap of 100,000 shillings on the motor vehicle tax. And he said, you know, we listened to your views and we listened to the views of Kenyans in incorporating some of these changes that we saw in the budget. What are your thoughts, especially on the numbers on the front page of the Daily Nation there? So bread prices are still set to go up. You know, we still have border riders who've had motorcycles valued above 130,000 shillings face higher excise at the end of the day. What do you make of those numbers?
Well, Michelle, I'll tell you this. I think for the part of the motor vehicle circulation tax and the removal of the cap, I think it's a good news for Kenyans to feel that that tax proposal is now more equitable. So it means everyone who's driving a 30 million car will expect a higher tax to pay. Of course, there are a lot of Kenyans who feel that that shouldn't be in existence anyway. But I find it's a tax measure that if done well and executed in a manner that provides the equity that Kenyans were expecting, because it felt like you're after the small Vitz driver. Yeah? and the guy who was driving a 40 million car was not to be touched. So I think at that point, government seems to have listened. It seems that government is stubborn on that particular idea, and I wouldn't blame them. That you could use very many measures to say that you're trying to curb emissions and God knows what, because at the center of this budget and the way it's titled, the idea is to try and combat climate change through a variety of tax and fiscal measures that are being employed to work on that. The issue of bread, yes, this is going to be extremely controversial with time. A lot of Kenyans still feel that government could have done more. It could have come out strongly and said that the 16% on bread shouldn't exist. I know this is going to be a political hot potato for parliamentarians while they're in Bunge, and I think they should, at least on that particular measure, try and do something about it. If Kenya Kwanza is as determined to make sure that they are listening to Mwananchi as possible, they should not touch that bread. Secondly, I also agree on the issue of boda and the excise duties which are being charged on some of these motorcycles. Yes, this is going to be an issue, and Kenyans would love to see a lot more charged on that. But again, you'll also be very surprised that people are still buying these bodas as we're going along, and it has also a lot of implications. It could be a government policy to try and reduce as much of that acquisitions as possible. But in my view, yes, we need to stop measures that are directly affecting the hustler that the president was campaigning to get the attention of. But for this one, for motor vehicle circulation tax, there I'm with the government. The moment you start insisting that this must be done, I'm with them. Make sure then all the guys who are coming in with very big motor vehicles
are also taxed, right? Because they're looking to get more money. When you look at page 7 of the Daily Nation, it says high-end vehicle owners are to pay over 400,000 shillings a year if the motor vehicle tax is implemented. But Anthony, when it comes to the bread issue, and you know there's a lot in this budget and many reforms that we'll be discussing, but the Kenya Kwanza government, UDA party, has campaigned on that hustler basis. And so when Kenyans see, you know, a 16% VAT on bread, it feels like a let them eat cake moment from the same government or, you know, that promised to make life easier for them. What, in your view, as the head of communications research at UDA, informed this? And has there been any resistance from the party that campaigned to save hustlers to this particular proposal?
Yes, I'd say that we are still advocating for our hustlers to be as comfortable as they are, and ideally that's why we are so fixated in ensuring that we implement our manifesto to its full. And I just want to mention something small about, first of all, the budget reduction on health. When this government is more focused on preventive and promotive healthcare, which has been a huge gap in recent times. And when you look at preventive and promotive healthcare, we've seen the deployment of more than 100,000 health promoters, whom will support the preventive and promotive healthcare at community level for our hustlers. And ideally, that's why there is that huge reduction, because there isn't much focus on the curative. And back to the bread issue, like I mentioned when we were starting the interview, one of our key objectives as the Kenya Kwanza government, apart from, of course, making cost of living good for all Kenyans, eradication of hunger, expanding our tax base, we also have foreign exchange balance and whatnot. But I'll delve a little bit on expanding the tax base. Currently, we only have 40% of our tax collections from pay as you earn. And ideally, that's why we are so focused on expanding the tax base. And how do you do that? How do you ensure that Mama Mboga pays taxes? How do you ensure that Boda Rider pays taxes? That is targeting the consumer taxes, like I mentioned before. When we look at a commodity like bread, when we look at a commodity like milk, these are commodities that are used on a daily basis in most of the households, and that's why we decided to, target those indirect taxes so that we can expand our tax base.
But does it make sense when Kenyans are already complaining of the high cost of living?
Well, as much as we are complaining about the high cost of living, the government is also doing a lot in trying to alleviate that from the common mwananchi. We have seen most of the products that are used at household level over time have reduced, and that is evidenced by our inflation. Currently, as at May 2024, our inflation is at 5.1% compared to May last year, which was at 8.1%. around 8.8%, which shows a steady decline in household commodities. And I want to delve deeper into the border riders. You see, the border riders offer a huge window of opportunity for everyone. Of course, the border industry has created a lot of employment. We are talking about 1 million direct people who are employed. We are talking about 1.5 million people who have been directly employed by the border industry. We are talking about border industry supporting more than 6 million people in their businesses indirectly. We are talking about revenue 3.4% of our GDP. We are talking about a daily income of 1 billion, which translates to around 365 billion yearly. So it offers a huge window of opportunity where we can collect a lot of revenue, but at the same time ensure that we are creating optimum opportunities out there for those people at the bottom of the pyramid.
All right, I want us to take a break. Yeah, Mokesi,
it's
please.
very important that we also note these borders that are being targeted, yeah, they are not, the motorcycles being targeted are not the ones for border. Borders, they are the ones who operate between that margin between 70 and 130,000. Beyond 130,000 is Mwakesi and this Bwananjeru applying, you know, buying these heavy motorcycles. Those are the guys who are getting a higher excise duty charge. So I think from what I understood from that budget, the target here is everyone else who's buying these higher CCs motorcycles, and not necessarily the guy who's trying to at least carry somebody from one village to another.
All right,
yeah.
I'll just take a break, but there's some good news in the budget statement as well for Kenyans. When you take a look at page 4 of the Daily Nation, M-Pesa users have been spared higher taxes in a U-turn by Treasury, and so the Cabinet Secretary reversed plans to raise excise duty on mobile transfer charges from 15% to 20%, and so it will remain at 20%. And of course, during the public participation in the finance bill, we saw stakeholders say this will greatly impact users because they'll have to pass down the cost on users. Dr. Kama, very briefly, your thoughts on this before we take a break.
It's a good thing. And actually, if I can just dive into that discussion of motorbikes, there's something that the government did by introducing VAT charges on electric motorbikes. You know, in the last year budget, it was made exempt. What that meant was that we would reduce on the import bill for fuel, because now the electric motorcycles would be even more friendly to the environment, would not be emitting greenhouse gases. But just a year later, the government reverses that proposal and starts charging VAT at 16% on imported electric motor vehicles. So I think it's a challenge even to understand which policy direction the government is following, because on one side it is advocating for a tree planting day so that they can be able to really protect the environment, but on the other hand, when they should actually be trying to mitigate the use of fuel gasless and welcome electric buses, electric motor vehicles, electric motorcycles, they are now starting to really to tax the same.
Right. It's an interesting turnaround. We'll be discussing that in our model. Let's take a break on New Dawn. When we come back, we'll continue to give you an analysis, especially on the impact, the possible impacts of the recently announced budget proposals. It's a tough balancing act for the government between raising expenditure and listening to public outcry over increased taxes. What are your thoughts on that budget and its proposals? Do speak to us on New Dawn. We'll be sampling your thoughts and comments after this break. To stay with us.